actually start with just an announcement, because Lorna wrote this to me this week, and it is the most amazing, amazing thing. Her fantasy series, which, again, features a martial artist character and just, epic fights, is in the process of becoming a movie, which is But that's not the big news. The bigger new news is that, so you may not know him by name, but you know his work. A very, very successful producer is now affiliated with her projects. He's done, Don Carmody has done, let's see, Good Will Hunting, Chicago, the Resident Evil movies, most recently the Mortal Instruments movies. So this is one of those where sometimes a writer, licenses their beloved work, their writing, to a studio, and you're like, good luck with that. I hope that works out. I would expect you're just going to see something amazing from the creative team that's being put together.
We're hoping for something very amazing, and with the panel I'm doing tomorrow, I'm actually doing that with the conceptual artist, and I think people will be in for some pretty neat, exciting things with this upcoming movie. It will be released next year.
So this is the weekend when this announcement is going out. So that is why you were asked to wave at the camera, because this is part of the press, potentially, that will be going on with the movie. So it's a very, very exciting thing. But let's talk about fight scenes. So, I don't, Lorna, is there a favorite fight scene that you've written that you'd want to talk about?
I'd say with my young adult novel that I write with Nia, the Dream Merchant Saga, I'd say with that book, it would probably be the first battle with the three heroes of the book when they are up against the sorcerer. And the sorcerer doesn't have the typical army. He has an army of mimes. And these mimes are trained to fight, but when the actual battle begins, the mimes do what mimes do best. They mimed out the whole battle, and they weren't winning. So it was just one of those odd things. And for me, it turned out to be a real challenge, because I'm used to writing big, sweeping, epic battle scenes with seasoned warriors, and they're all working with military precision. And now I'm working with mimes trying to do battle, and they're acting out this whole thing instead. In the Imago Chronicles, the one that's being optioned for a movie, one of the fights that really stands out in my mind is the first time that the female character, she's very, well, she's taller than me. She's 5'3", so she's a lot taller than me. And she actually is left to oversee the training of her martial arts students. And she is defied by the biggest, most belligerent, dumbass, male chauvinist student in the class. And that scene is loosely based on a sparring match that I was in against an equally large guy. And it was one of those things where he was always used to people backing away from him, even men backing away from him. And he was up against this puny little rabid Chihuahua girl. And I mean, it resulted in a dislocated jaw, but the guy wouldn't fight with me anymore after that. He said he was actually scared. So those two scenes probably stick out. And with that one, like I said, because it was loosely based on actual fights that I've been in, it kind of stands out for me.
So for me, I guess out of my series, the fight scene that sticks out the most is when the main character is trying to escort this important person, without giving away parts of my book too much, but it's her and a small group of people, and they're overwhelmed, and it's this big car chase, like, kind of like a Born Identity sort of thing, right? Where they're going through the streets of Moscow trying to escape, and she realizes they're not going to. So she gets out of the car, and in my book is an action thriller with superheroes. So it's got espionage, and it's got car chases and gunfights and all sorts of stuff like that.
For me, when I plan fight scenes, one thing, my character, the female in the Imago series, she doesn't have superhuman powers. She's half human and half elf. She's long-lived, but she doesn't have any special powers. She's spent a lot of time training. And I found that whenever I write fight scenes, usually my characters, when there's any kind of fight scene, they very rarely escape unscathed. And what I tend to do is I start with how much injury I want to inflict on my character and what type of wounds they're going to have. And once I know that, I know basically what style of fighting will be involved and what kind of weapons will inflict those types of injuries. And from there, I just kind of work backwards. It's almost like deconstructing the fight scene. So I know where I want to end, so it's basically working towards that place. And I found it makes it a lot easier. And I think with me, I've got like 30 years of martial arts experience. So I have a pretty good idea of how much the human body can endure and stuff like that. And so I kind of work from that and the injuries and work from there, if that makes sense to any of you.
Actually, so Lorna, a question for you with the extensive martial arts experience. Have you written characters in fight scenes that are using weapons or techniques that you don't know in your 30 years?
You know what? I've studied different forms of martial arts. The form I study actually incorporates 6 samurai schools and 3 schools of ninjutsu. So right there you have different styles, and within them, there's all these different styles of fighting. I've also done karate, so, you know, it's a lot of different things. And I also tend to study a lot of these documentaries that, you know, feature historical battles. And, you know, I study about the use of shieldtrons and flying wedges and all these other weird and odd things that most girls don't usually find interest in.
Are there, I mean, talking about the documentaries, are there specific ones or books or media that have been rich source material for you?
You know, I think it was on Discovery Channel that they had a series going on that talk about medieval armory. And I mean, I basically watch anything historical that, historical documentaries, because a lot of times when you watch a lot of these dramas, they take certain liberties, right? So I tend to watch actual documentaries that explain the use of weapons and their impact and battle strategies and in actual historical fights. And, you know, and I like to see the perspective of the losers, because history is usually written by the winners. Rarely is it done from this side of the losers, but it's always interesting to see what came into play to make a group win or lose. So, but yeah, I watch a lot of Discovery and History Channel.
Garth, for yourself, are there particular inspirations?
You know what, I have to agree, like Discovery Channel's like one of the writer's best friends. That and the internet. And, you know, I think even with a lot of experience, there's always something you don't know, and you're always learning. And, you know, with my books, because there are people that can do things that normal humans can't do, I have limits that I set. Like, these people cannot exceed this limit. So I really try and stay within that when I'm, you know, doing my fight scenes. But I also have to look at what is a person that can throw a car going to do to a person in no body armor with, you know, nothing else on. And I kind of cinematize it a little bit, because the reality is that person would tear through 50 people being unstoppable unless you had a way of injuring them, right, very quickly and very efficiently. And the use of firearms, etc., I've toned down a little bit, because I don't know if you know, but chairs actually are not bulletproof like they love to show on TV. Cars aren't either. Unless you hit an axle or the engine block, a 9mm round will go from one side of a car to the next and out the back. There's a couple of pistol rounds that will fire through 7 houses, and unless they hit something solid, metal, brick, they will keep going until they run out of energy. So in a book, if your main characters, if you're using those physics and your main character's fighting, they're likely going to get injured, because the real world does not have that many bullet-proof, bullet-stopping items, right? This room has very few. If you could fit behind that door frame, it may protect you a little bit, but we all won't fit behind that. So, you know, I think that's the hard part in writing a firearm-based fight scene is that as a writer, you have to decide how realistic are you going to make it, because otherwise you're going to have characters dying left and right, because that's the reality of guns and the reality of explosions.
I had some experience with the Israeli military, and yes, carbine and M16 rounds go through a lot.
Trees.
Really, trees, yes, well into hillsides, things like that. So, talking about fight scenes that you've written that have gone well, are there any you have worked on where it hasn't worked out quite the way you'd want? Any that have caused you some difficulty?
Other than that odd mime battle.
That is really unusual.
Yeah, no, it's kind of odd. For me, when I start working out battle scenes, I find that I already know where it's going, where it's going to end. So it's almost like watching something playing out, a movie playing out in your mind, and you're basically recording what's going on, just transcribing a piece of history that's playing out in your own mind. But no, I've been fortunate in this respect.
The only problems I've had is like I've gotten an idea that I wanted to do something different in the middle of and go, oh no, that's going to take me away from where I want it to end, right? So, much like Lorna, I know where the fight scene's going to end, and I just have to, basically paint the journey. And I've never had any like writer's block or anything in regards to fight scenes. They're just very easy for me to write in organic, and. Unfortunately, I can't get that experience.
Well, which is good, I guess. Are there any scenes in the projects you're working on right now that are proving particularly interesting or challenging? Anything coming up in the near future?
Well, with Imago Chronicles, the movie option series, I actually finished off that series with 10 novels last year. And so I've been focusing on the Dream Merchant saga, the young adult one. And with the last one, with this whole big mime thing, I thought, no, I'm going to have to ramp it up. I'm going to have to do something with a battle with sock puppets or something. so it'll prove to be something very different. But the people who have been reading it seem to really enjoy it, because I guess it's so oddly different. But I think that's going to prove to be a bit of a challenge doing the sock puppet thing. But I'll figure it out. That's my big challenge right now.
I'm actually working on the third book in my current series right now, and working on the last fight scene, the big epic fight scene. And the difficult part is, like, for me is it has to be better than the rest of them, I think, right? I want to end it on a really good note, but it's a lot larger than most of the rest of the fight scenes that I've put in there. It's not 6 people or 7 people. There's literally a couple hundred people fighting, and the small group of heroes fighting, and it's something where I don't want the heroes to win too easily, but they have to lose something, right? Because the reality of combat, whether it's war or urban combat or what have you, is both sides bleed. And I think to maintain the realism, you have to have that. But I get emails and stuff of like, this is my favorite character. I'm like, oh, this person's gonna hate me.
Yeah.
I'll be writing a scene and I'm like, oh, that person got really badly, messed up. They're gonna hate me. And I have gotten some like, you did this, and it's like, sorry.
Yeah, I have that feeling whenever I see somebody reading the Game of Thrones book.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, who's your favorite character? Oh, okay.
Just be careful. People have not finished certain things. There could be a riot in here.
This is true. So, a favorite weapon that you've used in a fight scene, and why? Just curious. Lorna, do you have any?
My female character, she's trained in all sorts of weapons. Probably her favorite is the iron fan or tesson, which traditionally the samurai, particularly those controlling movement on battlefields, would use it to direct traffic and move, portions of their army into place.
I think we need more description. What is this?
An iron fan, a tesson. I should have brought my training tesson. I probably couldn't get past border.
I'm not familiar. I'm just
it's basically a stainless steel. The ribs, when you open it up, the top surface is sharpened, so you can, you
Why
know,
am I the- why am
slice,
I the-
do a bit of slicing,
Give me a,
dicing, things like that. So that would probably, yeah. We both like the same weapon, oddly enough. But yeah, I'd say it's probably the Tesson because it's very small, easy to conceal, doesn't look like a weapon, and you can do some major damage with it. Perfect striking tool.
For me, I have many favorites in my series because I have people with superpowers, all right? So their arsenals are pretty broad, and I get a lot of creative freedom with superpowers. I still have limits and parameters I've set for most of the characters, but I have one of the bad guys who basically can throw fire and control fire, and that's just great to write visually. I watch a lot of videos about fire and putting out fire, and just kind of studied how fire looks when it's moving and the different sorts of fire, like lava flow. When you see those lava flows going down and they're burning and stuff, and writing that, it's always very fun for me because you have this guy who's throwing all these fire blasts around, and the main character doesn't have that. She's fast and she's strong, but she's not bulletproof, and she carries pistols, but this guy's throwing fire and bullets melt, and he can stop bullets fairly easily. So
you have characters who are using, more realistic weapons. And do you feel like you have to make them fantastical or anything?
You know what? This is what I found really interesting. I was actually following an online chat with a fantasy author, and she was basically saying that female characters who are basically small, and if they don't have superpowers and they're able to take on large opponents, she said it's very unbelievable. Like, you can't have a little puny person throwing a big guy around and restraining them and stuff. And I'm quietly sitting there listening to this and realized that she had no martial arts experience. And the people jumping and saying, yeah, that's not real when little puny women can take on these big guys. And so I just had to kind of step in, and I said, you know what? I've done martial arts for this many years, and all my students have been men, including, the National Taekwondo team, one of the people there, and the judo team. They come and train with us, and all my students have been men, and I've never had problems taking on, much larger opponents. I mean, I'm not even 5 feet tall with my heels on, so I'm as small as they get, and I found that it's one of those things you have to walk a real fine line. And I've started being asked to do more workshops where my husband, he's actually here, and he's a 9th degree black belt. He's 6 feet tall, and I like to use him on demos just to show that you don't have to be a big, strong guy or girl to do these techniques and put a person down. And we do interesting things too, like we'd actually use things like credit cards and shopping bags and scarves and stuff as weapons. And then when I mean credit card, not going out and charging it to the max and making your husband have a heart attack, but like actually using it as a striking tool and cutting and things like that. So it's one of those things where you want it to read out as exciting. To be exciting for the readers, but at the same time, I think that's probably the reason why so many of my characters get injured or they do get killed. My daughter will tell you now I'm a serial murderer because I've killed off so many of my characters. But it's one of those things that to make it real, you actually have to show the damage inflicted on the characters, the end result of what can happen in these fights.
So for the, we're going to open it up for questions in a moment. So if there's a microphone in the middle, if people want to stand up and prepare their questions. I do have just a question of just, a little bit more about what you each are working on next, because we sort of went through that very quickly at the beginning of this talk, but you're writing the series with your daughter, and
right now with The Dream Merchant, we're on the 4th book. It's been described as Ella Enchanted meets The Princess Bride, so it's a very different twist because the Mogul Chronicles was actually written originally for an adult audience, and actually I had the publishers of Harry Potter in Canada approached me and asked if I would rewrite for a young adult audience, and I thought about it, and all these people who want to be traditionally published said, what is wrong with you? This is the people who published Harry Potter, and you said no to them. But it's one of those things where, I don't want people feeling I'm selling out, for one. But yeah, right now with me, it's working on Dream Merchant, and because I've been called on to be the creative consultant for the Imago movie, I'm kind of juggling both of those right now.
That was going to be my next question, is are you involved in the actual movie production?
Yes. I'm more fortunate than most writers. Yeah,
That's pretty amazing. So, Garth, are you continuing with superheroes, which sounds great?
Well, I'm finishing up the third book in my Children of Divinity series. It's called Ascend, and my editor and I are kind of discussing how what I want to write next. I have ideas all the time. I'm one of those guys who has to carry some sort of method of writing things down. I've got ideas for books for years and years and years, and there's a fantasy series I want to write, but my advisors, my wife, and also my editor, who is not my wife, are giving me different directions. So I'm kind of trying to figure out where I'm going to go next, because my third book's going to be done really soon.
Yeah.
So, and I have a whole nother series for that character in mind. So it's really hard for me because it's one of those things where if I could just stay up 24 hours a day, I would write everything, right?
Yeah.
When someone figures that out, if you are in this room, come find me.
Okay. Let's take some questions.
Hi, thanks for being here. I just had some quick questions. When you're doing your action beats and you're going between dialogue and narrative, and you have your action beat, and then you kind of pause for a minute to give everyone a breather, and you're going on. Do you have any suggestions for flow so that you're not just writing, and then he went and bounced off the wall, and Joe came and punched him in the face, and then you have dialogue going on there? Has anything helped you, any tools helped you with the flow for those beats?
Well, you know what, for me, I found dialogue is a real tricky thing when you're doing fight scenes and people, see, because for me, I've actually been in real fights, not in spars, but in actual brawls, and I found there's no time for talking. When I do any kind of dialogue, it's very short, and it's usually people screaming, but there's not a lot of dialogue, because I found it kind of takes away, like, if you've ever seen a movie where people are in a life and death, they're whacking and pounding each other, and they're engaged in a full dialogue, it just, I don't know, it seems a bit odd. And again, because I've been in fights and I know that, you get whacked in the jaw and you get your jaw dislocated. There's not a lot of talking you're going to be doing, during that. But if you do any dialogue, keep it short, keep it a lot of times just moaning, dribbling of blood, spewing of blood,
Okay.
I would keep it really tight, keep the dialogue really tight.
I agree with that. I mean, I've been in my fair share of conflicts over the years, and if it's a hand-to-hand conflict, you do not have time to go, hey, I don't like the fact that you did this, right? Because they're showing you by trying to punch your face in. And, I was in WTO working for a security company, and we got jumped by a bunch of people, and it was an unpleasant situation. And there's literally no time. It's like you're just flowing with what's going on and trying to make sure your head doesn't get taken off by a riot sign. But in the context of a story, I think you can fit a little in, and it also depends on how realistic you're going, right? Because if you're trying to be comic booky, or you're trying to be more cinema oriented, as she said, movies that love to show that, you can put a little in, but you have to be smart about it, because while someone's sitting there shooting a gun, they're not talking. If they're behind cover for a second, they may be telling someone to do something, or duck, or move this direction, because they really do that in combat. But you don't go overboard. Don't have them start discussing their family life or something while they're while they're trying to fight for their lives.
So, I'll just say with my own experience, having had some weird situations in the past, there is one cliche that is actually true, which is when somebody, and I wasn't quite sure of his mental state, was aiming a .45 at me, the barrel really is this big. Honest to God. It's like, that thing is, it's a cannon.
It looks like a bucket.
Yeah.
I've had guns pulled on me twice, and both times it's just like, well, I could put a house in that. Is that a bullet in there? That looks like a bullet in there. And the first time my brain was like, that's a bullet in there. You know, and it's an experience. And when they show that in movies, that's real. That part is real when the main character sees this and it's like, okay, that is real. That's scary.
My question is really similar to the last one, but just outside of dialogue in general, the narrative of a fight scene, how do you keep it from getting just clinical? Like, how do you make it engaging for the reader on an emotional level so that they're still interested in what's happening without just, like, making it a play-by-play?
I think you have to show through the description of the character's face, the way they take injuries, the way the combatants wear down during a fight. Because even if you're winning, you're still wearing down. You're getting fatigued. So being able to put that in there gives you some emotional attachment to it. Showing a character stumble, for example, right? If you put it in the right place, that reader will go, oh no. And I had a guy that works on my security team here. He's a local writer as well, and he's written for Black Belt Magazine. He's been in Vietnam. He's, ex-military guy, and he's like, I can't put your fight scene down because the way you've put it in the book, I never know unless I turn the page if that person actually is going to live to the next page, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the trick, is like when you're reading through your copy, is knowing where it's paced on that page. If it's at the top, it won't have the same effect as if you manage to get it in the bottom where they have to turn the page to see what's going on.
Yeah, I think in terms of trying to keep it realistic, one of the things I've noticed some people do, because I have a background in martial arts, and I noticed that some writers, I've run into their work and I've seen it, and you have to keep in mind when you're writing for the audience in general, a lot of them may not have that martial arts experience. So I've seen people use some very technical terms, like if I turn around and say, oh, my character did an onikadaki on a person, it's like, you won't know that's a demon crush, and you won't know what a demon crush is unless you study my style of martial arts. So I don't use technical terms when I do it. When I describe the different things, people who study martial arts know what's being done, so that helps add to the realism. But it's one thing that I strongly suggest that, if you are writing and you do have martial arts, and I notice that a lot of people are just getting into it and really excited about martial arts, want to show it and put it in their work, and they end up talking all martial arts, and it becomes a lot of jargon that the average person probably won't understand. So you have to kind of be careful with that.
It's the same with firearms too. There's a lot of technical terms, especially when you're looking at long-range shooting like sniping and such, and you have to be very careful because you will scare people off. And you're like, I don't know if you guys have read Tom Clancy at all. He kind of gets a little technical with his. I tried to find a balance, and it's hard because some of my audience really loves that stuff and they want more of it in there, but there's also another part of it that's like, that's too much. And I try to go with show, don't tell, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in hand-to-hand combat scenes, because if you tell someone, that person's in a joint hold, well, that doesn't mean anything. I kind of try and show how that person's holding that person's arm or leg or what have you as I write, so that the reader can go, yes, I see what's going on, and I don't put a name to it usually. I let them figure it out later, right? So I just show them the picture.
Actually, I want to expand on that. You were just saying, Garth, about how your readers may not know if a character is going to live from page to page. Is that a point of view character? Or is that... I'm just wondering, how do you create that sense of peril for your point of view character?
Well, I don't write in first person, so it's easier for me. I'm not I've never, for some reason, I'm not a big first person fan, but I like writing in third person because of the fact that you can put peril everywhere and nobody knows where it's going to pop up. That's the way I handle it.
So next question.
Hi. I'm writing a fantasy, and so there's lots of swords and bows and knives and lots of different characters using lots of different weapons. So what is your advice / recommendation for so many different characters using so many different weapons and getting all of them accurate enough that somebody who knows what they're talking about can read it and be like, this makes sense?
You know what? Do you study martial arts?
I want to.
You know what? It's very helpful. I actually have students who have never done martial arts before actually come train with me because they don't even know what it feels like to be hit. They don't even know how to hold a sword properly. So, you know, they come in and learn. But, you know, when you have so many weapons and you're looking for realism, even though it's a fantasy story, I really recommend that you try martial arts and really get a sense. There's even places, we have a place up in Vancouver called Academy Duello, and they feature medieval fighting, and they have full stands of armor and all these other neat things, but they teach you how to hold a weapon properly, you know, how to fight with shields and all these things, if that's what you're gearing, you're writing towards. So really study that, study documentaries if you are too scared to pick up a weapon yourself and learn.
No, I would love to.
Yeah, and when you have that many weapons and a lot of characters, you know, your best bet in making both the character and weapon memorable is to probably assign a character, give it a specialty in terms of a weapon, whether it's a, you know, sorry, from the weighted chain or, you know, a naginata or all these other weapons. Make it especially for them because it really stands out when they have that unique talent, because every weapon is different and everyone handles a weapon differently.
Can I get that information from you after?
Sure.
That would be great.
We can talk in the other room.
And also, I would highly suggest making sure you have a trained teacher. Don't just go get a sword, because some people do that. Even a wall hanger can gravely injure you if you do not know what you're doing with it. And, you know, firearms are double that because you're most likely going to shoot somebody else. And classes, always classes. Anybody who doesn't have a firearm now, who's looking at getting a firearm and they're writing something with firearms, learning how to shoot it will help you write it, yes, but you do it with an instructor in a safe environment. If you do not, you could injure yourself or somebody else. And you know, I think the same for martial arts. Don't just start kicking walls or something because you will probably break something you don't want broken. But things like the SCA, there's a lot of people who are expert, you know, who are medieval martial artists effectively in the Society for Creative Anachronism. There's all sorts of resources that you can find in dojos and such that would probably be happy to even just talk to you as a writer. Just identify yourself and say, I'm writing this book and I'm trying to understand this. Because I don't know everything. I've never flown a jet before, but my uncle has. And when I started writing, I was like, I need to know what it feels like to go through, you know, a 14G turn. You know, and most of those guys love to talk and love to tell stories, and they're great resources. And I've never had a military guy go, no, I don't want to talk to you about this. So.
Not surprising. I'll add to Lorna's recommendation of the group in Vancouver. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the name of this group, but at the Renaissance Fair that's in Bonnie Lake in August, there is a medieval sword fighting recreation group, and they work with lots of different weapons. And the reason why they do the Renaissance Fair is to demonstrate and just show people, like, this is what this is how you use it, this is what this is. They're really an interesting group. Another question?
Okay, so when you're writing, say, a fight scene where it's like a really huge battle, almost like Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings epic, how can you keep track of all the various armies? I mean, do you just say this section over here does this, or do you try and plan each bit at a time?
My father had a doctorate in history. I grew up learning about medieval warfare and World War II and strategy and tactics, and I like using paper, and I will draw out where the armies are going and planning out the battle on paper, like I was with the Hot Wheels and the cars. Like I said, I'm very visual, and I will use like cards that have the name of the unit on it and move it around as I'm trying to choreograph this fight. And then when I'm done, I will go, okay, so here it is, and I'll write bullet points. my day job. I'm a project manager, so I like my bullet points, and I line out this basically script of where they're going, and then I actually write it.
Yeah, I found with big battle scenes with thousands of people going at each other, I found that probably the best way, especially if you want the readers, like whenever I do battle scenes, I like the readers to feel like they're right in the middle of the battle. And I found the best way of doing that, first of all, you make the reader aware of how many people are going into war. You set the atmosphere for it. But when you focus on key people in the fight and everything that's going on around them, and you use things, not just, the swinging of swords, but when you start adding the sounds of battle, when you start, including all your senses, the smell, the blood and the sweat and everything else, and incorporating that, it really puts the people in there. And, it's hard, to really make people feel like they care when there's that many, but when you focus on certain characters and what's at stake for them and their struggle and trying to survive this, I found that actually worked better for me than, just explaining, you've got this battalion here and they're going to be fighting with this, and this group is going to be launched to take on this. I've actually had people tell me that they've used the Imago books to study battle scenes, because I was told that I was able to draw people in for that reason. Like, I'm able to do these big epic battle scenes, but at the same time, because I zero in on certain characters and their struggle and everything around them, it seems to work for me better like that than, just describing big battle scenes.
You really
That
have to
helps.
personalize it.
Yeah.
Having those individual characters and seeing what they're doing and contributing, it keeps the reader, feeling that is a personal experience. Because, just like in every other large activity, you have a personal experience and everybody else has their own. And you can easily whitewash large battles if all you do is focus on the overall movement of the battle versus the contributions of the individual characters.
Yeah. And I found, too, that what you want to avoid, you were saying about show, don't tell. I've seen in books, too, where people, they actually talk about actual battles that happen that the characters are involved in. These are historical fictions. And what I found really kind of put me off of these certain books is they talk about these history-changing battles, and the character was there, but instead of describing what happened and putting the reader there, they describe the aftermath. Mm-hmm. That way they don't have to describe what happened in the thing. It's easier to say only so many people survived and so many people got stuck in the mud and got trampled, and it just, I just found it really bizarre. It took me really out of the story, and it made me care less for that person, because yes, he survived the battle, but you don't know what he did in there. Did he stand on the sideline? Did he just observe all this?
And you never want to send your reader away to read someone else's book when they should be reading yours. And if you just mention battle names, I think that's the tendency. Granted, you could look on Wikipedia, but I agree. I would not enjoy that as a reader, looking at it and going, okay, now I have to look up the Battle of Waterloo if I know nothing about it, and then try and understand what happened there. And a battle account is usually so long, you might as well, put that book aside for a while and sit down and read those.
So regretfully, we're just about out of time, but I very much want to thank our two panelists here. Please, so Talaria Press has some of Garth's work. Please check that out.
And I believe JJ21.
So just across the street. And I believe, Lorna, some of your books are next door? Maybe. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check.
I'll have a few books and some book plates there.
Okay, excellent. And what I'm hoping, because I think this is another topic that would be great, is next year, since the first Imago Chronicles movie is coming out in 2015, I'm hoping we will get a retrospective from you on how this whole production process goes.
It'll be interesting.
Please check that out when it hits the theaters. And thank you all for being a great audience.
Thank you, guys.